Melanie Phillips, if I gave you a one-way ticket, past, present, future, real, imaginary, or even a state of mind, where would you go?
Well, I would go to visit the poet and philosopher of the 12th century, Judah Halevi, who lived, I think, most of his life in Spain and in Egypt, and then went to Israel, to the land of Israel, to Jerusalem. There's legends surround his visits to wherever he was going, and legend surrounds his time in Israel. It is said by some stories, by some accounts, that he was actually set upon and killed in Jerusalem. But nevertheless, I would hope to meet him there. And it's a one-way ticket, which sounds rather alarming, but at least I wouldn't have far to go because I actually live mainly in Jerusalem, so I would actually be going home. I'd never been to Israel. I never wanted to go to Israel. And now I find I'm mainly living there. And I feel that it's where I have felt a more complete Jew. And all the time I was living in London, it never occurred to me I was an incomplete Jew. So there was so much I didn't know that I knew until I came to realize what I didn't know. And then I tried to start learning it. I visited Jewish communities in Australia and America and Britain. And what I found in all of them, and this was around the spring of 2025, spring of last year, I found in all of them communities in a state of absolute shock at the tsunami of deranged hatred and demonization that was coming not just at the State of Israel, but at them personally, as Jews in the diaspora who were being held responsible for the perceived crimes of the State of Israel in Gaza. Now, that perception of those crimes was itself based on wall-to-wall demonization, falsehoods, lies, mendacity, malevolence, but it was also coming at them in a very personal way, and they didn't know how to respond. They didn't understand what was happening. They didn't understand why so many in the West were behaving like this. They couldn't understand how so many people who were ostensibly well informed about all sorts of stuff, rational, apparently decent people, could be so immune to facts and evidence. They simply brushed it aside. And they couldn't understand what was coming at them personally. And they didn't know how to respond. They didn't know whether they should respond, whether they should be angry, whether they should be reasonable, whether they should try and argue, whether they should try and ignore it, to damp it down, to look after themselves and their own personal safety. They didn't know how to react. And to begin with, I was as perplexed as they were. And in many respects, I remain perplexed. I mean, this is almost incomprehensible, this kind of mass derangement. But I came to the belief that I needed to do something to help.
One of the questions that keeps popping up for me, Melanie, is why do you think people don't learn from history?
Well, first of all, people don't know history. I mean, one can't really exaggerate the extent to which people are ignorant of anything, really. Contemporary facts as well as history. But people don't learn the lessons of history because, they live in the here and now. And if there are lessons from history which are difficult to apply to your present circumstances because they entail some sort of cost, then you kind of shy away from it and you kind of make it right in your mind. For example, there are loads of people among diaspora Jews now, for example, in Britain. In Britain, there are attacks now on Jews, I'm afraid, several times a week. Physical attacks, as well as verbal onslaught. And the number of these incidents is growing, and it's very, very troubling. And there are people who think it's all over. We have to leave Britain. We can't live as Jews in Britain anymore. And there are people who think we're not going to leave Britain, but nevertheless, we're very worried. We're very frightened. I'm too frightened to go into town and so on. On a Saturday, when there are these terrible demonstrations with people chanting for the murder of Jews, and so on and so forth. And yet, there are large numbers of Jews in Britain who really are saying, there's nothing to see here. Move along. There's nothing new here. We've been through this before. We always have anti-Semitism. There's nothing particular to get excited about it. Okay, so it's a little bit worse now. It'll die down again. And other people say, are they crazy? Haven't they learned the lessons of history? Isn't this precisely what the German Jews said in the early 1930s? It'll go away. Hitler won't last. He's an absolute clown. We are completely integrated. We are loyal Germans. And look what happened to them. Now, that is true. But, there is a danger of applying the lessons of history too literally. This is not 1930s Germany. There are many, many differences. And to people who sort of read across from that to this are committing a grave error of inappropriateness and exaggeration. At the same time, there are people who won't learn the underlying lesson, which is that diaspora Jews are never secure and should never assume that they are secure, that we should always mentally keep a suitcase packed, because history over many centuries tells us that that is our condition in the diaspora. And so we don't learn it because it's too difficult to think like that. We don't want to live in a state of insecurity. And so we make it right in our own minds. And that's human nature, isn't it?
Melanie, you've been so generous with your time. I have one final question for you, and I always like to end on a high note. You make Jerusalem your home right now.
Mm-hmm.
What's your favorite thing about living in Jerusalem or Israel?
What's my favorite thing? The passion for life exhibited by the Israelis, because they understand that life has to be embraced, and they understand that it's precious and it has to be defended and celebrated. It's a place of joy. Even during the war that's raged in different forms ever since that terrible day of October 7, 2023, even during the terrible trauma and grief of that day and that followed, with all those boys, and I think one girl, maybe more than one girl, but certainly all those boys dying in the battle, on the battlefield, the grief, the trauma in Israel cannot be exaggerated. It's with us all the time. And now, the uncertainty and the fear that we're going to be abandoned by America, that President Trump won't see this through, that the Iranian regime will be able to repair and renew itself and become even more deadly than it ever was. That fear remains. So, there's all that going on, but simultaneously such a sense of happiness and joy and optimism and determination and love for the country, love for the Jewish people, love for what it represents, love for each other, even while they're screaming at each other. Love. When it comes down to it, if you're in trouble, they're all with you. They're all with you. We're all one people. We're all together. Jews, Muslims, non-Jews, Christians, Israelis, Druze. It's one culture, one people. And, we're living, I don't know about you in America, but in Britain, it's such an increasingly divided society. In Britain, they're not prepared to defend themselves anymore because they just don't see the point. In America, you're still able and willing to defend yourselves, but nevertheless, the divisions are increasing. In Israel, where they're so divided and they're all at each other's throats, and politically it's a complete basket case, and they're all completely, the politics is like deranged. And yet, there is such a sense of absolute identification with something that is loved and which will continue. Everyone knows it's going to continue. They're having children. This is the point. Britain, it's not replacing itself. America is not replacing itself. Europe is not replacing itself. The West is not replacing itself. Israel is replacing itself. It's having between 3 and 4 children per woman. Why? Because they want to continue, because they want to carry on, because they love life. And, we're faced in the Islamic world with a death cult. It says, we love death, you love life. Well, actually, they're not quite right, because in Britain and Europe, they're not prepared to defend the life of Western civilization anymore. So it's a kind of death wish. If you have a death wish, you can't fight a death cult. In Israel, it's an embrace of life in its fullest sense. That's what I really love about it.